Hi everyone, it's Cassie and welcome back for another Heffy Doodle video. Today we're going to be making a shaker card, so let's talk about what we're using. This stamp set is the Highland Honeys stamp set and I am going to be using it along with its matching dies. We also have the Scalloped Imperial frames. I love these, they're fabulous. And so we're going to use that in conjunction as well. Then we have the Pebble sentiments. These are beautiful and bold. And then we also have the Pebble add-on dies, which just obviously coordinate beautifully. And then we'll use some alcohol marker friendly cardstock. So I have a piece of that cardstock that I've put into my Misty along with the images that I plan to use. I'm inking them up with some Memento TUXEDO black ink, and then I'll stamp those down onto my alcohol marker friendly cardstock. All of it goes well for, as you guessed it, alcohol markers. So we'll start with our first color. I'm going to put everything up on the screen for you. And we're going to do this a little differently with our shadowing and shading. I'm going to put down a wash of my light color, and then when I'm ready to move on to the shadowing, I'm going to do stippling. If you've watched me before, you've seen me do it, but if you're unfamiliar with what stippling is, it's basically using dots. So I'm coming in with my darker shade, and I'm just going to start stippling that color down. And I'm using some light pressure, some dark pressure, and you're using the marker straight up and down with that paper. So it'll give you a perfect circle every time. But depending on the amount of pressure that you put down, that's how big your dot is, big or small your dot will be. Then I'll come back in with my lighter shade and just pounce that over the top. That will lighten up with time, but I love how that looks. We'll use a little T1 on the snow, and then we're going to start coloring our tiny little Loch Ness monster. He's so cute. We're doing a 3-color blend here because we're doing the stippling. So I've got the YR12, that was my lightest shade. Then I'll come in with some YR16, and you can tell that just adds a little bit of something. And then the YR18 is where it's really at. So I try to be a little sparing with that, especially on our little guy here. And then I'm going to come back in with that lightest tone. I'm not coming back and going lightest, mid-tone, darkest, back to mid-tone, back to lightest. I just do lightest, mid-tone, darkest, then right back to the lightest. Because I found that that does a really good job of making those darker stippling marks a little less dark. So here we are with our mid-tone. Like I said, adding it just wherever I might put shading. It's a fun way to do it, and it adds a little bit of texture to your design. Then coming in with that YR18, and then we'll come back in with the YR12 and blend that down just a little bit. So it just ends up giving this fun little effect for each of your images. Now I'm going to tack down the matching dies with a little bit of washi tape for all of our images, and then I'll run that through my Heffy Doodle mini die cutting machine. Y'all know I love this machine. I use it as often as I can, and it works perfectly for all these images. All right, now we're going to move on to doing a little ink blending. I've got the brand new Distress Oxide color called Salvaged Patina, and I'm just blending that onto this piece of cardstock. I'll grab out a little Heffy tape. Not only is it good for masking, but it's also good for protecting your fingers when you're doing a little bit of ink blending. So I'm using it on my fingers. And then once I'm happy with that, we're not going to use a darker color, we're just going to use that. I'm going to spritz a little water on my mat, take a tiny paintbrush, splatter that all over that background. You really can't see that it's done much here, but then I'm going to bring in this Gansai Tambi watercolor palette. This is the Starry Nights palette, and I'm going to use the lightest color. It just has a lot of shimmer to it, and we're going to splatter that all over that background. You can't see it now, but I will show you here in a second. We'll bring it up to the camera and take a look at that. That adds so much depth and dimension. I love it. So here is where the Imperial or the Scalloped Imperial frames comes in. I use some RAZZLEBERRY cardstock and cut that out. We're using that for our shaker. And I'm going to use some acetate. Well, this isn't actually acetate, it is transparency film. And if you're as old as I am, you remember your teachers using it on those transparency machines. That means that it is not embossing friendly. So you could not heat this, it will melt. So it's just a cheaper alternative, and I'll have it linked down below if that's something you're interested in. So I usually cut 2 pieces when I'm making shakers, and you'll see why here in a second. I put a small amount of glue on the outside of my frame. It does seep through, so another option would be to maybe use some 1/8 inch score tape. That'll work probably even better than this. but I had the liquid glue handy and I just grabbed it. It does get a little bit on the front of my transparency, but I can rub that away. No big deal. All right, I'm bringing in some 5mm Heffy foam tape. This stuff is fabulous for shakers. It's 3mm deep, and it comes in 2 sizes. The 5mm fits perfectly around these frames, but there's also a 12mm. So keep that in mind for your bigger shakers. This just works perfectly for something like this. And so it's like they were made for each other. So I'm just making sure that I'm butting those right up against each other. And this thickness makes it so you don't have to double up your foam tape. It's fabulous. Now, before I put my bits in there, I do want to peel off the release paper. And my shaker bits are just like a conglomeration of a bunch of things put together. Supposed to look like it's under the sea. We have some little sea turtles, we have sequins, we have starfish, we even have a little fish. And I'm not going crazy putting it in there. I just want to put a variety of things in there. But yes, it has a whole variety of things. I just didn't want it to go too crazy because I am going to put my little Loch Ness monsters inside of there. And in order to do that, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have it too filled up in here. All right, now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to take that second piece of transparency film and we'll stick that down. So that's going to go right down, and then we basically have a pocket. So those shaker bits aren't going to go anywhere, and that just helps me from making a mess. Now I'm going to glue down my Loch Ness monsters. We'll just put those sort of in the middle. I don't want those too far to the bottom and too far to the top. I want them right in the center. And then I have these pieces that I went ahead and die cut out. I even splattered all over them just using that Pebble add-on die, and then I adhered some to the top and bottom, and then I'm going to cut off the excess, and then I'll glue these down to the sides so that it makes it look like it was a continuous pattern without having to use up a bunch more of those die cuts. You could, but it's going to get covered, so that's why I didn't. Now I will kind of position my sponged piece, my Distress Oxide piece. We'll stick that down with a little bit more of that liquid glue. And then we can take our frame and we can stick that right over the top, which is just perfect. So I'll use more of that liquid glue on the outside. And then using that liquid glue will give me a little bit of wiggle room so that I can make sure that it is perfectly centered over the top. Love that. I've got another piece of white cardstock. We're going to use our Pebble sentiments on that. I'm going to grab Happy Birthday. And as you can tell, I went ahead and already die cut out one of the Pebble add-ons out of some banana split cardstock. I'm going to ink up my sentiment with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. That is a pigment ink, and I chose that because I knew it would be nice and crisp and I wouldn't have to stamp it a bunch of times. And then I'm going to tack that down with a little bit of washi tape, just one of the other Pebble add-on dies, and run that through my die cutting machine. It'll give it a nice little stitched border, and then it'll layer up beautifully on top of the other one that I have. So it'll almost look like it's a sun. While I had everything out, I stamped out another sentiment. That one did come from the Highland Honeys. And then I'm going to grab the smallest frame from our Scalloped Imperial frames and tack that down and run that through our die cutting machine while I have my die cutting machine out. See why I love this little frame set? It's awesome. And then it gives this cute little stitched border. We'll adhere down our sentiment to our frame, and then I'm going to attach that in that upper left-hand corner. This is an easier way to make sure that it's kind of flush. I'm going to add my foam tape right to my card. This way I can adjust exactly where I want my sentiment rather than trying to guess on the back of the sentiment and then try and figure out if it'll overlap where the frame itself is, the scallop frame. So I'll use a little bit more liquid glue, adhere that down, and that's not going anywhere. Then we'll take our mountain and put that inside of our card with a little bit more liquid glue, and our sentiment will go in there as well. You know I have to finish off the insides, right? Okay, so that does it for our card today. I love how this turned out. Shakers are always so much fun, and this one was a fairly easy one, just using it as a frame. So if you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.